I stood at the back of the crowd during my brother Eric's Navy SEAL graduation ceremony, a ghost to my own family. For 8 years, they believed I had dropped out of the Navy program in disgrace. My father, a former Navy man himself, had made it clear I was no longer his son after my supposed failure. But as I watched the proud faces of my parents from afar, nobody knew the truth, that I was actually Colonel Jackson Hayes of the Special Operations Forces. My disappearance had been by design, not by failure. Before I tell you about the moment when the general recognized me, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if your family has ever misunderstood who you truly are. My story begins in a household steeped in military tradition. As the oldest son of Richard Hayes, a decorated Navy veteran with a stern demeanor and unwavering principles, I grew up under the weight of tremendous expectations. From my earliest memories, our home in Virginia functioned with military precision, beds made with hospital corners, shoes polished to mirror shine, and tardiness treated as insubordination. A Hayes man serves his country with honor, my father would say, at least once a week during dinner. His piercing blue eyes would scan between me and Eric, but they always seemed to linger on me with skepticism. No matter how hard I tried, straight as in school captain of the wrestling team, perfect attendance in ROTC, I never quite measured up to his impossible standard. My mother, Sarah, a soft-spoken woman who balanced out my father's harshness, would often find me in my room after particularly difficult confrontations with Dad. "Your father loves you, Jackson," she would say, gently touching my shoulder. "He just shows it differently." But the distance between my father and me grew wider with each passing year. When I turned 18, there was never any question about my path forward. The Hayes family had served in the Navy for 3 generations. My grandfather had been at Pearl Harbor. My father had served in Desert Storm. Now it was my turn to carry the torch. "Make something of yourself," my father said, on the day I left for naval training. Not good luck, or I am proud of you, just a final reminder that I had yet to earn his respect. The decision to join the Navy was less about patriotism initially and more about finally winning my father's approval. I wanted just once to see that nod of acknowledgement, that look that said I had become the man he expected me to be. I trained for months before even applying, running 5 miles each morning, swimming until my lungs burned, pushing my body to its limits to ensure I would not just pass the entrance requirements, but excel at them. The application process was brutal. The physical tests eliminated half the candidates in my group. The psychological evaluations weeded out even more. Each cut filled me with renewed determination. When the acceptance letter arrived, I remember holding it like a golden ticket. For the first time in my life, I called my father at work. I got in. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the line. "Good," he finally replied. "Now, do not waste the opportunity." It was not the reaction I had hoped for, but it was something, a small crack in his armor of indifference. That night, Eric, who was 16 at the time, snuck into my room with a homemade card congratulating me. "You are going to be the best sailor ever," he had written in messy handwriting. That card meant more to me than my official acceptance letter. The first few months of naval training were exactly what I expected: grueling physical demands, sleep deprivation instructors who seemed to find fault with everything I did, but I thrived under the pressure. My background in wrestling and years of trying to please my impossible-to-please father had prepared me well for military discipline. What I was not prepared for was the day Commander Wilson called me into his office. I assumed I had done something wrong. Instead, seated beside him was a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself simply as Mr. Thomas. "Seaman Hayes, your performance has caught our attention," Commander Wilson said. "Mr. Thomas represents a specialized division that recruits from our top candidates. Mr. Thomas took over. We need individuals with your particular skill set for classified operations. This is not a typical Navy career path. If you accept, you would officially disappear from the regular Navy program. Disappear, sir? I asked, confused. As far as anyone outside this room would know, you washed out of the program. You would cease all contact with family and friends. Your service record would show you failed to complete training. The realization of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. My family would think I failed. That is correct. Complete secrecy is non-negotiable. This assignment requires a special kind of sacrifice. I thought immediately of my father, of the disappointment that would harden his face if he believed I had dropped out. 8 generations of Hayes men had served with distinction. I would be the first to wash out. How long, I managed to ask. Indefinite, Mr. Thomas replied. This is not a temporary assignment. I requested 24 hours to decide, though in my heart I already knew my answer. That night became the most difficult of my life. I paced my quarters, weighing family legacy against national service. By morning, something had shifted inside me. Perhaps it was time to stop living for my father's approval and start living for something bigger than family reputation. The next day, I signed the papers that would erase Seaman Jackson Hayes and create a ghost in his place. A week later, a letter arrived at my parents' home informing them that I had been dismissed from the naval program due to failure to meet required standards. I was not there to see my father receive the news, but I heard about it later. He had crumpled the letter in his fist and said, "I always knew he did not have what it takes." That same day, he removed my photographs from the living room wall. 2 weeks after my dismissal, I was permitted one final phone call home before beginning my new life. My father answered on the 4th ring. "Dad," I said, my throat tight. I wanted to explain. "There is nothing to explain." He cut me off, his voice cold with a disappointment that sliced through me. 8 generations of Hayes men have served this country with honor. 8 generations without a single failure until you. If you would just let me, you are not the son I raised. Do not call this house again until you have made something of yourself. The line went dead. Those words became my fuel. If I could not earn my father's respect as his son, I would become the best operative the program had ever seen. I threw myself into my new training with a single-minded focus that impressed even my hardened instructors. As far as the world knew, Jackson Hayes was a Navy dropout working odd jobs across the country. In reality, I was becoming someone else entirely, end quote, someone who would eventually outrank even my father's wildest ambitions for me. The transition into my new life was immediate and absolute. Within days of that final call with my father, I was transported to a remote facility where my specialized training began. The other recruits and I quickly realized this was unlike anything in standard military training. We learned advanced combat techniques, foreign languages, cryptography, psychological operations, and survival skills that went far beyond conventional military expertise. During those first 2 years, I often lay awake at night, wondering if I had made the right choice. The training was the most challenging experience of my life, pushing me beyond what I thought were my breaking points. But each time I considered quitting, I remembered my father's words, "You are not the son I raised." Those 6 words propelled me forward when nothing else could. My first mission came 18 months into training. I cannot disclose the specifics, but it involved extracting a high-value intelligence asset from a hostile territory. The operation was textbook perfect, earning commendations from command. More successful missions followed, each more complex than the last. My particular talent for adapting to unpredictable circumstances caught the attention of senior leadership. By year 4, I was leading my own teams. By year 6, I was developing operation strategies that would be studied in classified training programs. What began as a desperate attempt to prove myself had evolved into a genuine calling. I found purpose in serving my country in ways few would ever know about. Despite the professional success, my personal life was non-existent. No real friendships outside the unit, no romantic relationships, no connection to my former identity. The sacrifice was total, just as Mr. Thomas had warned. Every birthday, holiday, and family milestone passed without acknowledgement. I became accustomed to spending Christmas in desert outposts or remote safe houses thousands of miles from anyone who knew my real name. Though direct contact was forbidden, I maintained distant surveillance on my family through secure channels. I learned that Eric had followed the family tradition and joined the Navy after high school. I watched from afar as he excelled in his training, eventually setting his sights on the elite SEAL program. Each report of Eric's progress came with news of my father's boundless pride. Richard Hayes attended his younger son's advancement ceremony, one report noted. He was overheard telling other parents that Eric would restore honor to the Hayes name. Restore. The word implied something broken that needed fixing. I was that broken thing in my father's eyes. The deeper I went into my classified world, the more I tried to convince myself that family ties no longer mattered. I had a new identity now, new brothers in arms who trusted me with their lives. Yet, somehow, the wound never fully healed. In quiet moments between missions, I would find myself wondering what my mother was cooking for Sunday dinner, or if Eric still built model ships like he did when we were kids. 7 years into my new life, now a major, with an impeccable service record, I received intelligence that cut deeper than any physical injury I had sustained in the field. A distant cousin had written to my handler mentioning a family gathering at my parents' home. The cousin, unaware of the full situation, casually noted that my father had made a toast to the only Hayes son. The only Hayes son. 4 words that confirmed what I had suspected. In my father's mind, I had been completely erased. That night, I broke protocol for the first time and requested the contents of a letter my father had written to my uncle. My handler hesitated but eventually agreed given my rank and service record. The letter, dated 3 years after my dismissal, referred to me as the greatest disappointment of my life and a stain on our family's legacy of service. I had faced gunfire torture threats and near-death experiences without flinching, but reading those words from my own father's hand brought me to my knees. That night alone in my quarters, I allowed myself 15 minutes of weakness. 15 minutes to feel the full weight of being disowned and forgotten. Then, I locked those feelings away and returned to being Major Hayes, a man without a past. The final blow came when intelligence crossed my desk about my parents' 30th wedding anniversary celebration. A full family gathering was planned at their home in Virginia. Everyone would be there. Uncles, aunts, cousins, old family friends, everyone except me. Through secured surveillance photos, I saw the banner hung across the front porch, celebrating 30 years of the Hayes family legacy. In the family portrait taken that day, the space where I should have stood remained conspicuously empty. But most revealing was the collection of family photographs arranged on a special display table. In several older photos, I noticed careful editing. My image had been physically cut or blurred out. I had been methodically erased from the family history, not just forgotten, but deliberately removed. I was a ghost, not only in service to my country, but also to the people who had given me life. That night, I requested a particularly dangerous assignment, one that other officers had declined. My handler looked at me with concern, but approved the mission. Perhaps he understood that I needed the extreme focus of mortal danger to drown out the pain of familial rejection. The mission was successful like all my others, but I returned with new scars, both physical and emotional. In the field, I was known for my unflinching resolve and strategic brilliance. What none of my team knew was that each mission, each risk taken, each commendation received was driven by the words of a man who no longer acknowledged my existence. I had become one of the most effective operators in the program because in many ways I had nothing to lose. 8 years into my classified career, the trajectory of my life changed dramatically during what started as a standard operation in Southeast Asia. My team had been tasked with dismantling a network threatening American diplomatic interests. What we discovered instead was evidence of a much larger plot against multiple Western allies. With communications compromised and reinforcements days away, I made the difficult decision to exceed our mission parameters. Leading my team through 72 hours of continuous operations, we neutralized not just our assigned target, but the entire regional network. The intelligence we secured prevented 3 major attacks and saved countless lives. Upon our return, I was summoned to a debriefing with several high-ranking officials, including Brigadier General James Reynolds. I had never met Reynolds personally, though his reputation for brilliant strategic thinking was legendary within our circles. "Major Hayes," he said, "after reviewing our operation reports, your actions demonstrated exceptional judgment and courage under extreme pressure." He slid a small box across the table. Inside was the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. "Consider this a field promotion. Your new security clearance and assignment details will follow." That promotion marked the beginning of my relationship with General Reynolds, who became both mentor and the closest thing to a friend I had allowed myself in years. Unlike other superior officers who knew me only as an efficient operative, Reynolds took an interest in the man behind the service record. During a rare private conversation, 6 months after my promotion, he asked about my background. I gave him the standard cover story all operatives used. "I meant your real background, Hayes," he clarified. "I have the clearance to know." Something in his direct yet compassionate approach broke through my practiced detachment. For the first time in 8 years, I spoke openly about my family, my father's rejection, and the complete severance I had accepted as the price of my service. Reynolds listened without interruption. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "That is a heavier burden than most of my men carry," he said. "You have served with distinction while bearing that weight. It speaks to your character." Over the following year, I rose to full colonel after leading a particularly sensitive extraction operation in Eastern Europe. The mission details remain classified, but it earned me a reputation at the highest levels of command. Though my work brought me respect from those who knew the truth, the void left by my family remained unfilled. It was General Reynolds who brought me the news that would ultimately lead to a collision between my two worlds. During a routine briefing, he mentioned almost casually, "Your brother Eric is completing SEAL training next month. The graduation ceremony will be at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado." My hand froze over my coffee cup. "How do you know about my brother? I make it my business to know about the families of my key officers," he replied. "Especially when they have relatives following in their footsteps, albeit unknowingly." For weeks, I pushed the information away, focusing instead on operational planning for upcoming missions. Yet the date of Eric's graduation remained fixed in my mind, like a splinter I could not extract. 3 days before the ceremony, General Reynolds called me to his office. "You have accumulated significant leave time," he noted, studying my file. "Perhaps it is time you used some of it." "With respect, sir, I prefer to remain active." That was not a suggestion, Colonel. His tone was firm, but not unkind. "Sometimes, the hardest battlefields are the personal ones. You have faced every other challenge with courage. Why not this one?" "My family believes I washed out of basic training, sir. They have made their opinion of me quite clear." Reynolds leaned forward. "And you have spent 8 years proving them wrong, though they do not know it. Maybe it is time they did." "Revealing my position would compromise security protocols. Not if it came from me," Reynolds countered. "As theater commander, I can authorize limited disclosure to immediate family members. I will be attending the SEAL graduation ceremony anyway. Naval Special Warfare falls under my broader command." The possibility of reconnection, after accepting its impossibility for so long, left me speechless. Reynolds seemed to understand my internal conflict. "Think about it," he said. "You have sacrificed enough for your country, Perhaps you do not need to sacrifice your family as well. The day of Eric's graduation ceremony dawned clear and bright in San Diego. I had made my decision at the last possible moment, arriving at the base with barely enough time to slip into the back of the assembled crowd. I wore my service uniform with full decorations, a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. From my position at the rear, I could see my parents seated in the family section. My father sat ramrod straight, every inch the proud Navy man. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, as Eric's name was called among the graduates. Neither of them had any idea. I stood just 30 yards behind them. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. Awards were presented. Speeches were given. Each graduate received their trident pin, symbolizing their entry into the elite SEAL Brotherhood. When Eric crossed the stage, my father stood and applauded, something I had never seen him do for me. I had planned to leave immediately after the ceremony to disappear again without disrupting their celebration. This glimpse into the family I had lost was meant to be my closure, not their revelation. But, as the formal proceedings concluded, General Reynolds took the podium for final remarks. His speech was standard until his gaze swept the audience and locked with mine. A barely perceptible nod passed between us before he departed from his prepared text. Before we conclude today, I want to acknowledge that greatness often runs in families, Reynolds said. We have among us someone whose service to this nation exemplifies the highest ideals of sacrifice and courage. His eyes found me again in the crowd. Colonel Hayes, would you stand and be recognized? A murmur rippled through the audience. Most assumed he was addressing a different Hayes, perhaps a distant relative of Eric's, but the general continued, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground. Colonel Jackson Hayes, I believe you are present. Please join me. The crowd fell silent as I stepped forward from the back rows. The path to the stage stretched like a mile each step, bringing me closer to a confrontation 8 years in the making. I could feel hundreds of eyes tracking my movement, but only 3 gazes mattered, those of my father, mother, and brother. As I reached the front and climbed the steps to the stage, I heard my mother's audible gasp. My father's face had transformed from confusion to shock as he took in my full-dress uniform with its rows of decorations and the eagle insignia of a full colonel. General Reynolds extended his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the hushed crowd, Colonel Hayes is one of the finest officers I have had the privilege to serve with. His work cannot be detailed here, but know that countless American lives have been saved through his efforts. He turned to Eric, who stood frozen at the side of the stage. Ensign Hayes, I believe you know your brother. Eric's eyes were wide with disbelief. Jack, he whispered. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs as Reynolds concluded the ceremony. As the formal proceedings ended, I found myself facing my family for the first time in 8 years. My mother rushed forward, first tears streaming down her face as she reached out trembling hands to touch my face, as if confirming I was real. My father remained rooted in place, his face, a complex map of emotions, shock, confusion, and something I had never seen directed at me before, uncertainty, how he finally managed. The letter said, "You washed out." That was the official story, sir, I replied formally. The reality was classified. Colonel, he repeated the word seeming to stick in his throat as he took in my insignia. You outrank me. It was not the reunion I had imagined during countless nights on distant deployments. There was no emotional embrace, no immediate forgiveness or understanding, just 3 people staring at a ghost made flesh, trying to reconcile 8 years of constructed reality with the truth standing before them. The reception following the graduation ceremony was held in a banquet hall overlooking the Pacific. While other families celebrated with easy laughter and pride, ours sat at a corner table engulfed in tense silence. Eric kept staring at me as if I might disappear again. My mother could not stop touching my arm, reassuring herself, I was truly present. My father had barely spoken since the revelation. General Reynolds approached our table, breaking the uncomfortable quiet. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, congratulations on having two exceptional sons serving their country. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Colonel Hayes has been under my command for the past 3 years. His operations have been instrumental to national security. My father finally found his voice. What exactly does my son do, General? Most details remain classified, Reynolds replied smoothly. But I can tell you he commands our most elite special operations teams. His record is unparalleled. And the letter informing us he had failed out of training, a necessary cover, sir. Your son was recruited for his exceptional abilities. The separation from family was an unfortunate requirement of his assignment. As Reynolds excused himself, my father turned to me. 8 years without a word, he said, his voice strained. We thought you had failed, given up. That was the point, Dad, I replied evenly. No one could know, not even family. We need to speak privately, my father said, standing abruptly. We walked in silence to a deserted terrace overlooking the ocean. For several minutes, we stood side by side, watching waves crash against the shore below. I had imagined this confrontation countless times, rehearsed what I would say. Now that the moment had arrived, those prepared speeches evaporated. I thought I had failed as a father, he finally said, his voice barely audible above the surf. That I had somehow broken you with my expectations. Your expectations did not break me, I replied carefully. But your reaction to what you thought was my failure did. He turned to face me, looking suddenly older than his 63 years. What do you mean? You said I was not the son you raised. You removed my pictures from the house. You called me the greatest disappointment of your life in a letter to Uncle David. You erased me. His face paled. How could you know about the letter? My position gives me access to certain information. I have watched from afar as you celebrated Eric's achievements while pretending I never existed. I did not know that I was a colonel, that I had not actually failed. Would it have mattered? Dad, was your love always conditional on my success? For the first time in my life, I saw my father struggle for words. His eyes, so like my own, flickered with shame. When we received that letter saying you had washed out, he began slowly. I was angry. Not at you, though. That is how it appeared. I was angry at myself. I thought my pressure had broken you, that I had pushed too hard. So you disowned me. Cut me out of family photos. He shook his head. It was easier to be angry than to face my guilt. Easier to pretend you were a disappointment than admit I might have failed you. He looked out toward the horizon. Your grandfather was the same with me. The Hayes men have never known how to process failure, our own or others. It was not the apology I had imagined, but it was perhaps something more valuable: honesty. I need you to know something, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Every mission, every commendation, every rank advancement, none of it was to serve the family legacy. After that phone call 8 years ago, I stopped trying to earn your approval. Then why push yourself so hard? Because I discovered something worth serving beyond family expectations. I found purpose in protecting people who will never know my name. That purpose became enough. For the first time in my memory, my father's eyes filled with tears. I am sorry, Jackson. Those words are inadequate, but they are true. 8 years of absence cannot be erased with an apology. I replied, not unkindly. But perhaps we can start building something new. We rejoined my mother and Eric, the tension between us, not resolved, but somewhat diminished. As we sat together as a family for the first time in 8 years, Eric asked the question that hung in the air. Will you disappear again? His voice carried the hurt of a younger brother who had lost his hero. My work continues, I answered truthfully, but the complete separation was primarily for initial operational security. Now that my identity has been acknowledged, limited contact will be permitted. My mother reached across the table to take my hand. We have missed so many years she said, her voice breaking. So many Christmases and birthdays. We cannot recover the past, I replied gently, but we can move forward. The weeks following that reunion were filled with careful conversations and tentative steps toward reconciliation. My father, a man unaccustomed to admitting fault, made awkward but sincere efforts to rebuild our relationship. My mother alternated between tearful embraces and showing me preserved mementos she had kept hidden from my father, proof she had never truly erased me from her heart. Eric and I formed the easiest bond. Free from the complicated history I shared with our parents, he approached me with straightforward admiration that evolved into professional respect as he learned more about my work. I joined because of you, he confessed during one of our conversations. Even when Dad said you had failed, I never believed it. You were always too stubborn to quit. 3 months after the graduation ceremony, my family gathered at my parents' home for a private dinner, my first visit to the house in nearly a decade. As we sat in the living room afterward, my father excused himself briefly. He returned, carrying a small wooden box I recognized immediately, my grandfather's service memorabilia collection. "This belongs to you," he said, placing it in my hands. "It should have been yours years ago." Inside was my grandfather's Navy Cross and the pocket watch he had carried through 2 wars. Family treasures that symbolized a legacy of service. "I do not deserve these," I said quietly. "You have earned them many times over," my father replied, "more than any of us." That night, as I prepared to return to duty, I realized that the weight I had carried for 8 years had lightened, not disappeared. Some wounds never fully heal, but transformed into something I could bear more easily. The truth about family is that it can be both your greatest weakness and your greatest strength. The desire for approval can drive you to exceptional achievement or crushing disappointment. The absence of connection can create a void nothing else fills. Yet the possibility of reconciliation, however imperfect, offers a completion that no professional success can provide. I still serve in my classified role. My father and I will never have the easy relationship some sons enjoy with their fathers. But we have found a hard-earned respect that in some ways runs deeper than uncomplicated love. We are building something new from the ruins of what was lost. Sometimes, the greatest misunderstandings lead to the most profound healing, and while military decorations may command respect, I have learned that the connections we forge with those who know us at our most vulnerable are what truly sustain us through our darkest missions. Have you ever experienced a profound misunderstanding with someone you love? How did you work toward healing that relationship? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps me continue sharing these life lessons. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the path to reconciliation begins with the courage to be seen for who you truly are.